clients that are like maybe in like highly regulated industries that like can't do that. We just find it a bit harder to grow those shows typically.
What makes somebody a good client versus a bad client?
Good question. I'm happy to share like the secrets, which is...
All right, hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So a big part of the predictable profits operating system is setup. It's how we create, capture, and nurture demand. And one of the wonderful ways of being able to accomplish all three, creating, capturing, and nurturing demand, is podcasting. I think many times when people think podcasting, they're thinking maybe Joe Rogan and creating a fan base and so forth, but it's actually a really great way to grow the business by getting leads, nurturing those leads, and then ultimately shortening your sales cycle. In fact, commonly, we hear from our buyers that they have consumed almost every episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast before actually buying. So it's consumption that drives conversion. So one of the largest, most successful podcasting agencies, particularly for the B2B world, is Fame, fame.so. Tom Hunt is the CEO of Fame, and I wanted to bring him to you today. He's grown B2B companies like Gong, Canva, Paddle, Circle, Workday, Zendesk, a whole bunch of others. So if there's one guest that could speak to the benefit of podcasting, it's going to be Tom Hunt. Welcome to the show, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be here, Charles.
Oh, it's my pleasure for sure. So first of all, let's kind of go into, you started Fame and you niched down to B2B. Why did you make that decision?
The origin of Fame is that I spent like 7 years trying to build an online business and then nothing worked. So I had to get a job. But I had to get a job at a B2B software company. And my job was head of demand generation. As part of that, we started a podcast internally and it went very well. So my employer was very happy with it. And so essentially what I was able to do is like refine a service while getting paid by my employer. And it just so happened that the service and the process we developed was the B2B process. And so when I spun out and they became the first client, I thought it kind of made sense. There was definitely enough B2B companies in the world for us to make a big business. There's like 100,000 B2B companies in the UK and US that could be our customers. And so we may as well just focus on those. It makes like the SEO easier. It makes the paid ads easier. It probably improves our conversion rate in the sales cycle. Here's one big mistake I see like early stage founders making is like they try to build something for everybody, but you don't realize how big the world is. And so there's more than enough customers for you to have a smaller niche.
For sure. What do you see as the biggest differences in terms of your process and your delivery working with somebody who's strictly B2B versus other podcasting agencies that are more just generic, hey, if you want to launch a podcast, we'll go ahead and we'll work with you?
If the goal is to get an ROI, which is like make money on the time and money you spend on a podcast, then the great thing about B2B shows is that in the short term, you can often get an ROI from the guest side. E.g., you bring on guests that could be customers or you bring on guests that could be partners. And so that's actually what happened with my old employer's podcast. We did like 10 episodes that were focused on sales operations. Very boring. We sold sales software. And the 11th guest was the VP of sales operations at Intercom. And then he got chatting with our CEO after the discussion and then ended up buying our software for the whole of Intercom's sales team. And so now the business obviously loves the podcast and they then gave us more resources to increase the frequency, improve the production value, to build the audience, to get the longer term ROI from having this group of sales ops people that knew, liked, and trusted us. So that's a core difference with B2B podcasts to B2C in that in the short term, it's very hard to make money from the listener side, whether it's B2B or B2C. And so there's this incentive or you can incentivize yourself to keep going to build the audience by getting an ROI from the guest side first.
It's kind of like a book, right? A lot of people think that you get rich by writing the book, through book sales, but it's actually not the case. You got rich because you wrote the book. In other words, for the predictable profits playbook, as an example, we look at our prospects. It's the people who buy that book, they read the book, they go, you know what? That's interesting. That changes everything. I'd like to have a conversation with you and ultimately end up becoming a client. It's very similar on the podcast. And there's very few Joe Rogans that can turn around and get rich because they have, the podcast, but it's usually how they use the podcast that allows them to get rich. If you're using it, like you said, as a client acquisition platform, a partner acquisition platform, or even as just a platform to increase that consumption for the prospects that are sitting there going, this is interesting, I'm open to working with you. Timing is not 100% ready just yet, but I'm getting close. And then the more they hear these episodes, all of a sudden something is said and they go, oh, you know what? That's exactly what I need. Now I'm ready. And then they move on to the next step.
Exactly right. That final point you're touching upon is, in my opinion, the holy grail of any like high ticket or B2B sales process or marketing, is to build an audience of ideal buyers that know, like, and trust you, so that when they need to buy your thing, like 3% of any market in B2B or high ticket is ready to buy. Then, so you have to get the rest of the 90%, 97% to know, like, and trust you, so that when it is time to buy, they know exactly who to come to. And yeah, the podcast can do that. The book can do that.
We ran a study many years ago, and we looked at when people bought and the time frame in which people made that purchase. And what we found that it was 7.5% of marketing qualified leads would buy from us between 0 and 90 days. Now, sales qualified leads, they would buy faster, right? But marketing qualified leads between 0 and 90 days, about 42.5% would buy anywhere from 90 days to over 2 years, which is pretty fascinating. So then all of a sudden it was like, well, what's the difference between those that purchased within the first 90 days versus those who took a little bit longer? And it came down to one key piece of information. And that was the people who purchased within the first 90 days are the ones that consumed the most amount of information. And so it's consumption that drives conversion. And so when we're working with clients, one of the questions that we'll ask and one of the strategies that we'll look to deploy is, what is your consumption strategy? In other words, if you think you could just get out there by putting a fancy ad, you're going to drive the most amount of buyers and then, be done with it, you're missing a lot of opportunity, because you're only really targeting the 3% of the people that you mentioned right now. But the bigger market it's really, I think it's somewhere around like 40, 50, 60% thereabouts of the total potential addressable market, because you're going to have some that just aren't going to be the right fit anyway. What is your play for them? And that really is going to be that consumption-based strategy. And one of the things that I love most about podcasting is you have their attention for a long period of time. Whether that's a podcast that's 30 minutes or an hour, you have that attention. So you're getting that consumption. And one of the top digital marketers on the planet, he called me up and he said, hey, what are some ways in which we can shorten the sales cycle? And I'm like, well, again, it's consumption drives conversion. And one of the things that he did is he went back and he looked at, well, let me see how much they're consuming of my content, the average person. And his data, I'm envious of the way that he's able to collect data. He knows everything, the snap of a finger. I believe he said it was 7 hours and 28 minutes. They go 7 hours and 28 minutes. That's how long either they listened to a podcast, watched a video, were on my website, whatnot, on average 7 hours and 28 minutes. So from there, it became the strategy of what needs to happen in order to get somebody to binge our content as quickly as possible to shorten the sales cycle to get to that magic number of 7 hours and 28 minutes. And podcasting, you instantly began to ramp up that time, because you get somebody for 30 minutes or whatever, and they're sitting there going, okay, I got it. Okay, I got it. And there is a whole principle that was designed a while ago known as the laws of effective frequency. And they talk about the more that somebody sees your brand message, the more content they consume, the more they end up creating that demand. Oftentimes people think, oh yeah, I do marketing. And I'm like, that's cute. You can't actually do marketing. Nobody can do marketing. It's like me saying, oh yeah, I do doctor. You can't do that. Marketing is a function. It's a function of how you create, capture, nurture demand. And that's why podcasting is such an important tool in order to capture many of all three sort of functions of marketing.
There's bad news though.
I'm listening.
The bad news is that out of the three main areas of content, and we'll go through them in a minute, the podcasting is the hardest to grow.
Yeah.
The way I see things is that we have really just three levels of like the B2B content that any business should be creating. There's podcast at the bottom, hardest to grow, but as you mentioned, most valuable because you get them in your headphones. In the middle is email. So people that sign up to your newsletter, and the top is social. And so as we go down the chain, they get harder to grow, but more valuable. So social is the easiest to grow, but it's the least valuable because a 3-second view on one of your shorts is not the same as 30 minutes in the headphones or 2 minutes reading the newsletter. So that's the bad news. But then the good news is that the podcast can actually be the source for the content at the top of the funnel, social, and the middle of the funnel, email, quite easily now, especially with AI. So there we go. Like if it's hard to get people down there, but you can use the content from the podcast to bring people down there from those levels.
Oh, absolutely. And see that now you're getting, much more strategic, right? Because where it's easy to say, okay, much easier to collect somebody's email address, but you can tease a piece of information. And it's like, and then if you want to go deeper on the strategy, click here to listen to the podcast, right? And then now you can get people down to listen to that podcast, or on socials, you share different snippets of a video, particularly one with a nice, strong viral hook. And then it gets somebody interested. And then, okay, well, this is really good. I want to get more of this interview, or I want to get more of this content. How do I do that? I then got to go to that podcast. And you're right. I mean, it's harder to grow if you just expect people to organically find you. It's really, really hard. But you record one podcast episode like this one, this can turn into a YouTube video. It can turn into several different shorts all across social media. It can turn into a blog article. It can turn into several different LinkedIn conversation, tidbits and posts and so forth. One post can create weeks of content if you really think about it. It's pretty good.
Exactly right. So that's the good news. So after the bad news, the good news is that the podcast is like the highest leverage content creation activity because it enables you to create the podcast itself and everything else.
So you've grown some really incredible companies, some of which we work with, right? How did you influence beyond just, oh yeah, hey, we helped them record a podcast? How did you influence that growth?
So I think what's probably most useful for the audience is to go through like specific podcast promotion strategies that maybe they haven't heard of before. Yeah. Would you agree?
Let's do it.
Cool. Yeah. So I'll go through a paid one and a organic one. And these are two that are like working in the past like 2 months or like 1 month. So they are working at the moment. Over time, like we've had the business for 5 years. So promotion strategies vary in their impactfulness, but these two are working right now. So the organic one, there is a big arbitrage with lists. Like people create like in any niche, a common SEO strategy is for that company to create the blog post that has the list of the top podcasts in their niche. And so if you search for like any type of podcast, you'll find like 10 of these articles. Now, fortunately for us, the people that write those articles don't really understand yet the value of that content that they have. Mm-hmm. And so it's relatively easy to just reach out and get yourself featured in those articles. Now, sometimes you do have to offer something in return. Things we've offered in the past is simply just paying, like, can you insert us in there and we'll pay you $50. Sometimes you get that. Other times we've been like, you put our podcast there, we'll bring your CEO on as a guest onto the same show. Or we also have a similar list on our site. We'll put your show, if they have one, on our list if you put our show on. And so if you just go through that and like over time get onto like 5 out of the 10 lists, you're just going to have this like slow level of inbound demand for the podcast. So it doesn't cost any money, but obviously it costs some time. Well, it might cost money if that's the only thing they'll accept, but it costs time to like do that outreach and build those relationships. So that's the first one. Second one is related to what we we're just talking about. And what we're seeing is that if we focus on LinkedIn specifically, LinkedIn is prioritizing vertical video. And so what we're finding is that for all the shows we run, we like to create like, let's say 5 to 10 vertical videos per episode. And then we have the host or the podcast page for that site or the company page, sometimes all three, posting those videos for every episode over time. And then whenever we see one that is popping off a little bit, e.g. getting like more likes or more comments or more impressions than normal, then we like to add in ad budget in order to push that specific clip. What this means is because the algo is already enjoying the clip, we typically get lower CPMs. And then of course the link to subscribe to the full podcast or to the email newsletter, if we're doing the full strategy from social to email to podcast, is in the comments. And so that's a paid strategy where we're like leveraging organic already to just like add some fuel to the fire. So those are two that I'm seeing at the moment that are working well.
Yeah, I like that. And then, so, you push it all in your company page, and then based on likes and engagement, that's, when you could push it and put some ad budget behind it.
So there's actually 3 LinkedIn places that they can be posted. The host personal profile, the company page, or for most of our shows, we like to have a company page for the podcast. Now, typically the best performing is the host page. And so when we get one working on host page, then we can use thought leader ads to promote that from either the podcast page or from the company page, but through the host profile, if you know how thought leadership ads work on LinkedIn.
Now, why would you do a company page just for the podcast instead of putting it on, like, let's just take Circle, for example. Why wouldn't Circle just take the podcast episodes and put it on their Circle page as opposed to having a podcast exclusive page on LinkedIn and just running it there? I hope that makes sense.
I think of Circle specifically, they have a lot of stuff they like to release on LinkedIn. And so if we want to do 3 clips per episode and the show's weekly, then we might be just bombarding their followers, and a chunk of their followers maybe don't really care that much about the conversations the CEO is having with other leaders. And so there might only be capacity for like 1 post per week or per 2 weeks on the main Circle page. That's what their content marketing team decide. And so then we might be like, okay, well, let's try and build our own separate audience on a company page for the podcast.
Got it. Now, I know a lot of business owners right now, they're overwhelmed. The idea of just saying, oh, podcast sounds great, but I barely have enough time to get everything done that I need to get done. And the thought of me then having to record a podcast, edit a podcast, create all these videos, post these videos in all these different places, I don't have time for all that. It sounds nice, but I don't have time. How do you solve for that problem?
Working with Fame or not working with Fame? Let's do not working with Fame. Like, if I didn't have Fame, this is what I would do to start a podcast with me spending minimal time. I'd find somebody in the Philippines for like, I don't know, $10 an hour who's going to be the podcast manager. And if they're full-time, they're probably going to be able to do pretty much everything, so that I would just turn up, record the episode, and that's it. That's like the ideal situation after the system is built. And so let's just go through the system to start with. There's like finding and booking guests, editing and production, and then promotion. So finding and booking guests, the podcast manager just needs to understand who you want to be an ideal guest, like who could be customers, who could be partners, who has a big audience in your space. They then build lists. I, as the host, would then review probably, at least to start with. Once approved, the podcast manager can reach out and book them in. Once they're booked, the podcast manager can then probably use AI to like scan their profile to come up with good questions. So that's the first part. Second part, editing and production. Yeah, here we probably would need some extra resources. We probably want a freelance video editor who can do the long form video. They could also export the audio from that and then also create the clips. So freelance video editor, let's say $20 an hour. We need 2 hours per episode, maybe a bit more than that. And then we can use any AI tool to pull out and create the written assets for the show. The podcast manager can manage that. So I don't really have to do anything on the editing and production. And then promotion, there's a lot of information out there on the internet about podcast promotion strategies. We went through 2 on this episode. So I just have, whenever the podcast manager has time, I just have them work through those strategies. So once that's all set up, it's going to cost us this $10 an hour for a full-time person in the Philippines, to say $2,000, and then maybe $500 a month for the video editor. So it's like $2,500 a month for you spending just the 1 hour per recording each episode. Once the system's set up, it probably takes some time for you to set up your system. And of course, if you're working with Fame, then you get that straight away with us doing those things.
What do you do? So, normally I don't have my guests actually, pitch themselves, but I think this is going to be a little bit of a different situation because I'm genuinely interested, and I know our audience would be interested to learn more about Fame, should they want to do it. Look, our listeners are resourceful. Their time is extremely valuable, and they understand the value of good content and a good strategy. So I'm giving you the rare permission to pitch yourself. So tell me, somebody decides they want to go ahead and invest in Fame. What do they get?
Kind of similar to what we just discussed. And again, I love pitching on other people's shows. Basically, they're for 3 areas. Like for any podcast you start, you need the 3 areas: guest booking and communication, editing, production, and promotion. And so you can build that yourself, or we could also do it. But there's one extra thing actually that I think is important that we can go through as well. Like, and I'm happy to share like the secrets, which is podcast positioning. So before you launch, you want to make sure you get this part right, because if you get this right, and I'll explain what this is shortly, it makes everything else in all of those three areas a lot easier. So we break down podcast positioning into two areas. So there's two things you have to define. First is the niche, so the category in which the show sits in. The second is the edge, and this is the thing a listener would tell their friends about. So I'll give a quick example. My podcast is called Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur. Very clear, isn't it? The niche is B2B entrepreneurship. The edge is the confessions piece. I tried to get the guests to share stuff they wouldn't normally share. Let's talk about Circle's podcast, as they mentioned them. It's called The Money Movement. And so here the category is quite clear. The niche is quite clear. It's about finance and it's about money. And then the edge is this like the movement part. And it's quite clever because it's like what Circle do is move money around the world. And it's also this movement towards crypto. And so that they've done that quite cleverly. So I covered that quite quickly, but that is crucial in order to find the right guests, find those early listeners, to ensure that the snippets you create or the episode titles or the long form videos edits are like aligned with the positioning of the show, because that is our theory about what the listener wants. That makes sense?
It does. Let me ask you then, the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So you have permission to grill me if you don't like it. What do you think about that edge and that, that start?
Yeah. So from like my experience of the show, which is being interviewed and doing some research beforehand, I think the edge is going to be quite clear from what I've seen, in that it's like we're going to talk about money or we're going to talk about business, like getting past the 7-figure mark. Maybe what isn't as clear is the niche or the category, because like assume it's like getting a business past 7 figures, but is the ideal guest or the ideal listener a certain type of business, or are we open to talking about any kind of business that gets beyond 7 figures?
Got it. Well, I mean, it initially started that it was going to be, for anybody that wanted to take their business beyond 7 figures. What we found is many of our listeners are actually 7-8 figure companies that are, they predominantly built their business through word of mouth and referrals. And now they're looking to say, okay, what do I need to go and do beyond that? And then we've also found the majority are B2B service related organizations. And so now we know that our listeners are traditionally B2B service related organizations. There are some 6 figures. Majority are between 1 and 3 million. And then there's a few that are a little bit bigger and then into 8 figures.
Got it. B2B service companies between 1 and 3 million, looking to get into 8. And if typically, I think the focus of the content is on like sales and marketing as opposed to like hiring, operations.
Majority is going to be about sales and marketing strategy. It's really growth. Like, what did it take to grow? Some people are going to say, it's all about my team. And let's talk about how I recruited and attracted A players. Some people, majority are going to talk about, sales and marketing, sometimes partnerships, or whatever that might be.
How long have you had the current title? I'm just going to get the description of the show up.
I'd say we've been doing this now it's been several years. We've a few hundred episodes, maybe 250, 260. I've lost track.
Love that. So I'll just read out the description for the benefit of the audience. Growing a business is hard, and most people underestimate the amount of hard work and strategic thinking that's involved to grow and scale your company. That's clear. And actually, the title has build, scale, and profit in the title as well on Apple Podcasts only. Beyond 7 figures, build, scale, profit. Category is on entrepreneurship. I don't know if there's much to change about the way we're communicating the positioning at the moment, because we've got the fact that we're specific about growth, we're specific about getting beyond 7 figures. Maybe the only thing to think about is, as you mentioned, like your ideal listeners, or the most listeners you have is between 1 and 3. So they're actually already beyond the 7 figures, right? So maybe a potential tweak of the positioning in the future could be like approaching 8 figures, build, scale, profit. But I think you guys are doing a good job.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then, so aside from the production value that you help, so getting them started, getting the right title, the right position, production value, then what happens? So we have great production value. Are you also involved then in creating the different clips for social, the clips for YouTube? Do you do any posting and publishing on that? What happens there?
Yeah. So The first step is the launch process, which is positioning, as we've discussed. Now, if a client has a podcast already, then instead of the launch process, we go through the handover process where we take on, and we can also refine positioning during that process. Then once those two things have happened, then we work through throughout those three areas. So it's finding and booking guests, editing, production, and then promotion. So that means like working out who the ideal guest is, building lists of them, having the client review and approve, and then we reach out either as us, the producer of the show, or the client through their LinkedIn profile. Once the guest booked in, then we produce what's called an interview sheet, which is the research and the questions that the host needs to ask in order to create the content that's aligned with the positioning. In editing production, we're taking the raw assets and then we're filtering them through that podcast positioning to create assets that align with the ideal listener. That includes like all the clips, all the long form videos, the audio, the visual design, and the written assets, and any ads that we have in the show. And then when we do promotion for customers, that means we are setting download goals, and it's our job to hit them. We have a little guarantee. I'm not going to pitch too hard, but we basically work through 8 promotional pillars that we have. There's 3 to 5 strategies in each pillar, and we just work through those sequentially to hit the download goals.
Excellent. So you also get involved in assisting in increasing the amount of downloads that someone might.
Well, it's basically our job, and we have a guarantee where if we don't hit that on average over the first 6 months, we get the 7th month of services for free. So there's some skin in the game.
Gotcha. Oh, that's very cool. What makes somebody a good client versus a bad client?
Good question. We typically like clients that are keen on short-term ROI, but not short-term as in like 2 weeks, short-term as in like 6 months. And so ideally they are willing to commit to release with a consistent publishing schedule, which is typically weekly to monthly, for 6 months. Because let's say we have a bi-weekly show. If we release for 6 months, we essentially have 12 episodes or 12 opportunities to build relationships with guests, because we're much more likely to see the ROI in the short term from the guest side. And then if in that first 6 months through those 12 opportunities, we're able to like sign a customer, sign a partnership deal, then their CFO or their CEO is much more likely to then give us or give them the permission to reinvest to build the audience side. So first point is they're willing to essentially give it a go for 6 months, a consistent release schedule. Second point, and I've seen this more recently as like the podcast market gets a bit more crowded, clients that are willing to be, I don't want to say controversial, but like, or I don't want to say aggressive, but these are the kind of the words I'm looking for in their positioning. Like we typically see the clients that are willing to make a statement with their positioning, cut through the noise, and the shows are much more easy to grow. We're able to find better guests. And so we have some clients that are like maybe in like highly regulated industries that like can't do that, which is totally fine, but we just find it a bit harder to grow those shows typically.
Yeah, I would agree. I think too many people are so worried about playing it safe and everybody will like them and so forth. They're afraid to ask the tough questions. But I think it's also actually much better just to be authentic and raw. There's a reason why I didn't send you the interview questions in advance, because I found that you just don't get an authentic presentation. I really like to be able to get to know you. And then with our guests, like oftentimes they'll say something and we'll go down that rabbit hole and we'll keep chasing it all the way down. Every podcast episode that I do, I actually never really know how it's going to end, because someone will say something and it's like, oh, that's interesting. We're going to explore that. And we're going to keep going.
Yeah, this is a very advanced hosting skill though. And most of our hosts probably wouldn't be able to do that. But yeah, I totally agree. It challenges the guest. And if the host has the skill set, it often does result in better episodes, because you actually end up having a real conversation as opposed to like going through the 7 points that the guest wants to make. And so I'm glad you do that. But it is like partially because you're generally a good communicator. You know a lot about the space, obviously, that you're talking about. But then B, you've also done, did you say 200 episodes?
Somewhere, I think almost 300 by this point.
Yeah.
And I've lost count, but it's been a long time.
Exactly. So this is what happens when you have, basically with a host, we want interest and expertise in the subject matter and communication skills. And you can't really practice number one. You just have to have that communication skills. You can get that with like 250 episodes like you've done.
I think it's, to be fair to our listeners, part of me wants to say, go back and listen to the first couple episodes and you'll see how much I sucked in the first couple episodes. At the same time, I'm embarrassed and I'm like, don't go back and listen to the first few episodes, because I was really pretty terrible. But the truth is that no matter what it is that most people do, including myself, when you start something, it's a courage to being able to get out there and know that I'm okay sucking at it in the beginning. And that's okay. I have the confidence in myself and my abilities and my future. to be able to say, I'm okay just doing it. My first videos, I almost took them down on YouTube because they're so embarrassing. Like they're so painfully embarrassing. But I decided I want to leave them up because I want people to see just how bad I was when I started. I was so awkward on camera. I was terrible when I first started keynote speaking. I was, terrible when I first started podcasting. I was terrible when I first started sending out my own emails. I used to get so nervous. My wife and I were talking about it the other day, and I said, I still remember my first podcast episode. I was so nervous. Like, I went to the bathroom 3 times before it even started because I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is scary. And now, there'll be an impromptu television interview, and I'm like, yeah, go ahead, whatever. You want to start now? Let's just go start now. Like, no big deal. You do it enough, and now it's no big deal. I was on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange on TV on both of them. And it was just like another day, another conversation. In hindsight, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I really wasn't nervous. But it was like, when you do it enough, you just build that muscle, and then it is what it is. You have to be willing to suck in the beginning.
And then the skill set is also very transferable, right? Like if you're giving a talk to your team, or if you, as you said, if you go on TV, you have this ability to talk professionally and in a compelling manner, because every week for the last, I don't know how many years you've been doing it. So that's another pro for somebody being the host of the show,
I suppose. And then I know we are kind of pushing up against the limit here, but now let's talk about just hosting and what makes a really good host. So, because we just kind of talked about like there's bad hosts and there's good hosts, but like what makes a good host? And you've now seen God knows how many podcasts. What is the difference for you or your recipe rather, in creating a good episode?
Yeah, let's do host and let's do good episode. I think there's the episodes are a bit more broader. So the host, interest and experience in the niche, communication skills are basically the 2 things. And well, actually, the third thing we should add is practice, because then with practice, you need less preparation. You can go down those rabbit holes, as we mentioned. And also, you'll find, it'll be great actually to do a filler word analysis from like episode 10 to episode 250. You'll find that over time, as you get more confident with speaking, you actually use less filler words. We have an AI tool that does filler word analysis on our host episodes, so we can like challenge them to stop using the word so much in their episodes. So interest and enthusiasm, communication skills, and then practice are 3 things that ultimately will get a better host. In terms of a good episode, the top 3 things, first is the guest. So even if you have a rubbish host, if the guest is incredible, enthusiastic, and it gives valuable information, then we can pretty much get a good episode. The second is the skill of the host. So we covered that. And then the third is how well we're aligned, assuming the positioning is strong. The third is how well we're able to align the episode content to the positioning of the podcast. That is, if the podcast is growing, that is what the listeners like and are expecting, is content that aligns with the positioning. So whenever we have a show that's not growing, we actually don't look at the promotion strategies first, because retention is a foundation of growth. And actually we need to look at the content, and we want to try and retain more listeners first. And so then we look at recent guests. Is this the right guest persona? Did they have the right level of expertise or communication skills? We look to train our host. How many filler words are they using? Like how much prep do they need? Do they really like the content that we're talking about? And then after that, we're looking at like, have we released episodes that actually don't really cover what we promised our listeners? So those are the 3 things we work through to try and optimize the quality of an episode.
That's great. And then optimize the quality of the episode, but then there's also the way that the conversation flows. So there has to be a way that the conversation flows. And then you mentioned earlier about adding ads into a podcast as well. So there is a way to use this in order to create demand, in order to seed interest for your product or service, and do it all tastefully because if somebody's listening and they're like, oh, you're just outwardly trying to promote yourself, it's the fastest way to lose listeners. But when somebody's listening and you're subtly introducing this idea of your services, you are giving them a taste of results and answering their questions and letting them know that you understand them and their problems and their frustrations, as well as their aspirations and their dreams. That's how they continue to lean in and are eager to learn the next one. But there's a flow, there's a dance, there's something that needs to go on there. You talk a little bit more about that.
We typically like to see a show growing in the first couple of months after launch before we think about ads. Because we're just trying to build trust with the audience. We're trying to not slow down the growth, because whenever you add ads to anything, typically growth will slow down. So once we see the growth, then we want host read and host scripted ads. Now, those are two different things. So first we want the host to read the ad, but we also want the host to script the ad, because if we have like an advertiser, let's say we're working with advertisers, if we have the advertiser script the ad, we want the host to read it because the listener has a bond with the host, but we also want the host, we don't just want to read the ad, the script of the ad, because they may not be talking in the way that we want or that we understand our listeners. And so ideally the advertiser is happy for the host to script the ad. The advertiser probably wants to sign it off, but then we want the host to read it. So in my podcast, for example, we don't have any mid-roll at the moment. We just have in the custom intro I do and the custom outro I do. So for every episode, I record those separately straight after the recording so I don't forget. And for the ads that I put in, I'm reading them and I've scripted them, and they go in at the start and at the end, whether that's for us or whether that's for advertisers. So host read and host scripted, but we typically want to wait until the show's growing before we add them in.
Got it. Makes sense. Awesome. My favorite question that I love to ask our guests. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your biggest, best tip for our listeners who want to take their business beyond 7 figures?
Retention is the foundation of growth. So before the team take the piss out of me, because this is what I say in like every other meeting. Before like looking for that new, I know this is like a marketing and sales podcast, but before looking for that new marketing sales strategy, whether it's a podcast or anything, I would look at how we can slightly tweak the product or the customer experience to make it that tiny bit better, keep compounding that over time, and then we're just going to get them to stay for longer, and then we're going to increase our referral rate. And then whenever we put marketing or sales on top of that, it just works much better. So retention is the foundation of growth.
Well, I would agree. Many people are so focused on the front end, trying to bring clients into the front end. What happens is they're inadvertently sending out just as many people out through the back door. And so they're constantly chasing their tail. And the way I look at retention is not only keeping clients, but then there's also, so there's upsells, downsells, cross-sells, the whole deal. Then there's this element of recurring revenue. And for most companies that want maximum valuation, they should be looking at a minimum of 50% of all of their income to be recurring revenue, whether that's annual recurring revenue or monthly recurring revenue. And then one of the other components, again, if we're looking at maximum valuation, because at some point you're going to want to sell the business. And even if you don't want to sell it right now, the option to know that if somebody comes knocking that you could sell it for maximum valuation, that's part of freedom, is just knowing that you have options. You don't have to sell it, but you have the option should you want to sell it for top dollar. And one of the other core elements is about 6 different core elements. One of the other core elements that they look for is a churn rate that's 5% or below per month. And so if you're not focused on retention, then you're not getting your compounded growth, because it's so much easier. If you have 100 clients, just for easy math, and you want to grow by, say, 35% next year, you're going to have to replace all 100 clients and then add an extra 35. That takes a lot. Versus if you were to keep your clients and you brought in the same amount of clients this year as you bring in next year, you have that compounded growth. But then there's the recurring revenue. At least 50% of your revenue is recurring revenue. And churn rate below 5%. I mean, you're all kicking ass and taking names. So I'm a big fan, let alone the fact that people are saying they love you, they're going to get word of mouth referrals, all that other jazz. So yeah, awesome, man. Very cool. Now, people want to learn more about you, the work that you do. Where do we send them?
Fame.so is a podcast agency, and then LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So Tom Hunt on LinkedIn. If you have any questions about podcasting, feel free to just DM me. I'm happy to answer them without pitching.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, we talked a lot today. We talked about the benefits of podcasting and how it fits in creating, capturing, and nurturing demand. We talked about the difference between what makes a good podcast, what makes a bad podcast. We talked about retention towards the end of this, and then everything in between. So for our listeners right now, remember that these are magic words, 3 magic words that everybody should have, tattooed on their arms. Consumption drives conversion. Consumption drives conversion. If you want to shorten your sales cycle, if you want to convert more deals, it's going to be consumption drives conversion. Of course, podcasting isn't the only strategy, but there's a reason why I have over 200 episodes. It's a great strategy. So that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Remember, Tom Hunt over at fame.so. If you're interested in learning more, if you have a B2B company and you're interested in podcasting, check them out over at fame.so. And for more strategies, tips, and information to grow your company faster, more predictably, and then less dependent on you, check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that is predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudette with my new friend, Tom Hunt. I will see you in another episode.